Ukraine has now been fighting the Russian invasion for nearly 3 years. Its forces are losing ground in the east, and the incoming Trump administration in Washington is pushing for an end to the conflict. DW correspondent Sonia Phalnikar has been assessing the mood of residents and former soldiers in Kyiv.
A memorial to fallen soldiers in Maidan or Independence Square in the heart of Kyiv. A place to pay tribute as Ukraine ushers in yet another year under the shadow of war. The sea of flags has grown steadily as the country's losses pile up.
There are such a lot of people who have died. My nephew was killed in October in Donetsk.
Every time you're on the city center, you're forced to see it. It's a direct reminder to people that the war is going on, that it takes the lives of the best of us.
This is another heavy price the war has extracted. Fedir Sambursky was hit by a drone while serving near Kherson in 2022. He needed multiple surgeries. He opened this cafe 2 weeks ago, supported by a charity that helps veterans like him with rehabilitation. It's a meeting point for injured soldiers and their families. Here, people like Fedir can be productive again.
I enjoy the feeling when you lie down in the evening with that pleasant, light exhaustion. I really love it. I'm passionate about this project.
The charity is trying hard to lift spirits for the new year, but few here are in the mood to celebrate.
There's no festive mood because, unfortunately, the war continues, and our comrades and civilians are dying in Ukraine. But on the other hand, we need to keep going for our children.
Not everyone agrees. Some of these former soldiers say it's time to end the bloodshed, though they don't agree on how.
It's difficult to talk about it. I don't want to lie to anyone. Let the Russians stay in the territories they have destroyed, but they should not be allowed to go a kilometer further, not even 1 meter, so that our country can create solid borders and they will not be able to invade again.
I think the sooner there will be some negotiations, the sooner the war ends, the better it will be. But the war should end on conditions that Ukraine remains Ukraine, and we should not lose what we are fighting for.
If and when the fighting stops, one thing is sure. Ukraine will have many more injured soldiers it will need to find a place for in society. Fedir hopes his cafe can serve as an example.
I really want to create conditions for our soldiers so that after we win the war, they understand that someone is there for them, that they have somewhere to go, and that they are not forgotten.
Despite the pessimism, there's some hope here as well that 2025 could bring a resolution in the conflict, one that leads to a fair deal in Ukraine.
Our correspondent Sonia Phalnikar filed that report and joins us now from Kyiv. Sonia, hi. One of the voices we heard in your report just there, a former soldier, he suggested that Ukraine should let the Russians stay in the territories they've destroyed, as he put it. Were you surprised to hear him say that?
Well, giving up, territory occupied by Russia in Ukraine remains a particularly sensitive issue here. And that opinion expressed by that soldier in that report is really not very common and not something you find so openly talked about. Opinion polls here show that a majority of Ukrainians now want their country to negotiate an end to the war as soon as possible. But they remain, more ambivalent when it comes to giving up territory. Russia currently occupies about 20% of territory in Ukraine. And the fate of Ukrainians in these areas remains a very touchy topic here. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy yesterday in his New Year's address addressed Ukrainians in Russian-occupied territory. He said Ukraine will return one day. He said, all Ukrainians will be united one day. But, of course, linked to this issue, there is a growing sense of anxiety here also as Donald Trump prepares to return to the White House in a matter of weeks. Because, the fear here is that given Trump's previous criticism of U.S. military aid to Ukraine, his admiration for Putin, his promise to bring the war to an end swiftly, that will force Ukraine into some kind of a bad deal, pressure it to make some territorial concessions in order to, achieve a settlement. So there are a lot of worries there.
When you look at these concerns and these factors, has that had an impact on the more general mood of Ukrainians? When you look at people today, has it changed from earlier in the war?
Well, people do remain resilient, in cities like Kyiv as elsewhere, people go to work, they shop, they meet friends, there is an outward sense of normality. But yes, I think the mood has gotten undeniably darker. Almost everyone here has had family members or friends killed. There are cemeteries, in small towns and villages that are growing larger. On the battlefield, Ukraine has had a particularly tough year, with its forces on the back foot, losing ground to Russians, especially in the eastern Donetsk region, where much of the fighting is concentrated. And Ukraine now faces a major challenge, which is manpower. It's struggling to, find fresh, motivated troops amid mounting losses. That remains a big problem. And away from the battlefield, Ukraine, of course, in the last year has stepped up, drone attacks against Russian military targets in a bid to kind of degrade Russia's war effort. But that hasn't really stopped Ukrainian towns and cities from being regularly targeted by Russian missiles and drones. Just this morning here in Kyiv, we had a major drone attack that, killed reportedly 2 people and injured several people. So people are really exhausted after nearly 3 years of war.
Understandably so. Thank you so much for your reporting there. That is Sonia Phalnikar in Kyiv.